Welcome to Leadership Reimagined, where game-changing conversations are reshaping the world of work. I'm Janice, the CEO and founder of Ellig Group, Executive Search Advisors, where we are reimagining search through our long-standing commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion. I am delighted to welcome Darren Rebelez, Chief Executive Officer and Director of Casey's, a Fortune 500 chain of convenience stores operating in the Midwest and Southern states. Casey's is the third largest convenience retailer and fifth largest pizza chain in the United States. Darren offers a wealth of experience from his career as a senior executive in the convenience, restaurant, and fuel industries. Prior to Casey's, Darren served as the president of IHOP Restaurants, executive vice president and chief operating officer at 7-Eleven, and prior to 7-Eleven, held numerous leadership roles with ExxonMobil and Thornton Oil Corporation. Preceding his corporate career, an impressive background, Darren was an Army Ranger and Gulf War veteran, a native of San Diego and a graduate of the U.S. Military Academy at West Point. Darren serves on the board of directors of Globe Life and as an advisory board member for the Children of Fallen Patriots Foundation, a nonprofit group created to provide college scholarships and educational counseling to military children who have lost a parent in the line of duty. In 2020, just 1 year after assuming the CEO position at Casey's, Darren was honored as Retailer Executive of the Year by Convenience Store News. Darren, welcome. I'm delighted you can join us today.
Thanks, Janice. And it's a real pleasure to be here. I'm looking forward to our conversation this morning.
Much to learn because I've got to tell you, finding great pizza, even in New York City, is hard. So I wish a Casey's was here.
Well, maybe sometime.
Maybe sometime. Yeah, you're mainly Midwest and Southern states, correct?
That's right. We're in a 16-state footprint, primarily in the Midwest, based in Ankeny, Iowa. And we get as far south as Oklahoma and Arkansas, but yeah, primarily the Midwest.
Well, I love when you go on the website and it says whether you're stopping for gas, grabbing a quick meal, or picking up a few essentials, Casey's are here to make your everyday easier. Fresh food, groceries, healthy options, it's all here at Casey's. So we're going to talk much more about Casey's, but let's start with your modest beginnings. Growing up in San Diego, witnessing your grandfather, who immigrated from Mexico, build a successful business from the ground up. How did this shape you, your values, and your drive to succeed?
You know, I learned a lot from my grandfather. And as you mentioned, he immigrated from Mexico and he was an entrepreneur. He owned his own barbershop and was a barber his entire career. And this was before there was social media. There's no internet. So you really had to build your business by word of mouth in that situation. And so I really learned that he had no option but to make sure every customer was completely satisfied every time, and not just okay satisfied, but satisfied enough that they would tell other people. He ran it until he was in his 70s, and then he finally retired. And even after he retired, he had people coming over to his house, and he would cut their hair in his kitchen because they just couldn't envision going anywhere else for a haircut. So it really taught me a bit about retail and how to take care of the customer.
You certainly learned a lot about that word of mouth advertising, right? And the customer centric availability of the service that your grandfather provided. And they never left him. How wonderful was that? As a second generation Latino, first to go to college in your family, a graduate of West Point and having served in the Army, that was a real foundation for you and a breadth of experiences. Besides your upbringing, what did these experiences do to shape you for today? And maybe did you have any aha moments in your career that caused you to go into the business you're in today?
My experience at West Point in the military was really the foundation for learning leadership. You know, West Point at its core is a leadership school. Everything you do there is put through the lens of leadership and teaching you how to lead people. And so that was really where I learned what works and what doesn't work. I also learned how to follow. That's part of the West Point system is you first, in order to lead, you first have to know how to follow. And so a great experience there. In terms of an aha moment, you know, for me, growing up, there's an expectation that I was supposed to go to college, but because I was the first one in the family, we didn't really have good resources for that or really have an understanding of how that would work. And so my plan had been to try to get a scholarship if I could, or if I didn't succeed in that I would enlist in the Marines and serve in the Marines for a few years and do the GI Bill. And then work my way through school that way. But the aha moment was when I was in high school and I was walking through a high school college fair and with my dad, and West Point had a booth set up, and he really encouraged me to go talk to them and learn more about that. And I had not heard of West Point at that point. And so I went and talked to the officer. He explained to me how it worked, and it was a full scholarship, and you served in the Army afterwards, which sounded a lot like my plan B. And so I really got excited about that and went through the process and was fortunate enough to get in. But that was, as I reflect back on my life, that was probably one of the bigger inflection points in terms of what direction I might have gone. And so that was my aha moment.
And then your corporate career. Take us through the positions you had, what you learned from those experiences.
I've had a lot of different experiences, and I've learned something from all of them. Not so much on the corporate side, but my very first job was as a dishwasher in a restaurant. And again, that was a great experience for me being in high school. And again, I got to learn the lesson of hard work, and that seems to be a recurring thing. Having been a dishwasher in a restaurant for several years, I really learned an empathy and an appreciation for everyone who does work, regardless of what that work is, because it takes everybody to make a business successful. And I think sometimes some of the workers that do the manual labor get overlooked. And that's unfortunate because they're the ones that really make all of our businesses go. And so for me, I've become very comfortable speaking with our frontline workers. And some of the most fun I have is when I go to our stores and get in our kitchens and talk with the people preparing our pizza now, or back when I was at IHOP, working in the kitchens, preparing our food. And I find that I learn more about what's working in our business and what's not working in our business from that time speaking with them than I do from any time in the office with reports and all of that sort of thing.
It's true, to really be able to empathize with the employee on the front line, and they know what's going right and what's going wrong, so you're hearing it straight from, that employee to make then the customer experience better.
Absolutely.
So you took over as CEO in 2019. You put together a 3-year strategy, and then, a year, 18 months later, COVID hits. What did you do to pivot from the strategy you had to what you needed to do to really keep the business going and sustainable over the short term and long term?
It was a tricky moment in time. And as you mentioned, I started in the middle of 2019, and we started to put our team together and built out our strategic plan in January of 2020, right before the lockdowns took place. We had an investor day out at the NASDAQ in New York and presented our 3-year plan, and it was very well received by the investment community. And 6 weeks later, we were sending everybody home and we were locked down. And so the first thing we did was really focus on the safety of our people and the security of the company. And for us, we were an essential service. So we didn't have the option of completely shutting down. We had to figure out how to operate safely in this environment. And I would say that this is one of the times where my experience in the military really helped out, in that there's often difficult operating conditions in the military, and those aren't excuses for not doing the job. Those are just conditions that you have to operate in. You have to find a solution for overcoming those obstacles and still being able to operate. It was really important that we kept our stores open and operating, because over 50% of our stores are in towns of 5,000 people or less. So we have a very rural footprint, and in many cases, our store is the grocery store, it's the gas station, it's the pizza place, it's the coffee shop. It's really important in the community. And so we are really serving a need. So we focused on that first, and I got the executive team together and we sat down with our strategy and we said, okay, we just got through working on this. Let's do a gut check here, and let's make sure that this strategy still holds together or not. And if it doesn't, what do we need to do to pivot? And the things we needed to do strategically to grow the business and make it better were still the things we needed to do. Now, we had to reprioritize some things, and primarily on the digital side, we pulled some things forward that we had further out on a roadmap. A good example of that is curbside pickup. That was something that we identified on our technology roadmap that we would enable in a few years down the road, but it wasn't a big guest need today. And all of a sudden, it became really important to have curbside pickup. And so within 60 days, we had curbside pickup launched in all 2,400 of our stores. We enabled third-party delivery. We rolled out a rewards program. We did a lot of things at a little quicker pace, but still things are consistent with our strategy. And fortunate for us, our team has been fantastic. In spite of working virtually and in difficult conditions, we've been able to execute against our strategy, and we've had a lot of success over the last couple of years as a result of that.
You always have to be on the lookout for the next crisis, right? So being agile is important. Casey's, you recently acquired Buchanan Energy and 40 pilot stores in response to your strategic plan, as well as you opened a third distribution center in Joplin, Missouri. So looking ahead, what are those growth opportunities for Casey's, including expanding your footprint potentially?
We are so excited about our growth opportunities, and a lot of that comes back to our strategy, as you mentioned. And the way we look at growth is we look at from the lens of organic growth and what we call reinventing our guest experience. And that's doing everything from enhancing our digital capabilities in our stores, driving our prepared foods innovation and coming up with unique, creative items, and expanding our private label assortment. That's something that we didn't really have much of prior. And now we're right around 5% penetration of private label products in our stores and growing every day. So that's really all about just making the existing store base more productive and working harder for us and growing. The second pillar of our strategy was to create capacity to invest in the business by capturing efficiencies that we find in the business. And a good example of that was we stood up a centralized procurement team that allows us to be more effective in our procurement and purchasing. And we've had a lot of success with that, particularly in this environment where we're supply chain challenged. That team has done great work to free up capacity for us. And then the third pillar of our growth is to expand the store base, as you mentioned. And so we do that both through acquisition and through new to industry store builds that we build ourselves. And when I look at the white space for our growth from a store count perspective, I think of it this way. We're in 16 states, as I mentioned before, primarily in the Midwest, but 2,000 of our 2,400 stores are in only 9 of those states. So we have a really good concentration in 9 states. So we have tremendous white space. We have a lot of opportunity. There's 150,000 convenience stores in the U.S. About 90,000 of those stores are held in chains of 10 stores or less. And it's becoming very difficult for operators without scale to compete in this environment. And so we're finding a lot of acquisition opportunities, as you alluded to before. We've done a number of deals, and we have a dedicated team focused on looking for more. So again, we think there's a tremendous room for us to grow for a long time.
Yes, and I read that, you really, what you do in communities, you really are sort of like a hub sometimes, right, where people even get together. And your brand, you talked to this in another article, you talked about the love and affinity that people have for the Casey's brand, and that you've received so many letters from your guests saying how much they appreciate the fact that you have a store in their community. And your team members making this happen. So you're really helping middle America, aren't you?
Yeah, that's really the way we look at it. And that inspiration really came from our founder, Don Lamberti, who got started by leasing a store from his father. And he started with one store back in the late 50s. And the store did so well, he went down to the next small town down the road and built another one. And that store did really well. And he built another one. And Don's a very humble guy. He's still around. And he'll tell that story that he just built it one at a time in these towns. But these towns have traditionally been underserved. And so the Casey's store really does show up as a hub in the community. And people will refer to it as their store. Their Casey's.
That's great. That is so great. It truly is the customer focus, which if we did that more of that today, I think, you'd have greater loyalty, right, to the different brands. So that's wonderful. I want to remind our audience that you are listening to A Latino CEO Impacting Middle America with Darren Rebelez, President, Chief Executive Officer, and a Director of Casey's. The topics we cover, like today's, are all current, and a new topic with a new game changer is released on the third Thursday of every month. This is a great way to stay current on relevant issues happening around us. And now let's return to Darren. I want to pick up on what Casey's is doing with regard to current gas prices, which are certainly on the rise. How has this affected your business? And now with the advent being accelerated of electric cars, will Casey's also provide charging centers going forward?
Yeah, Janice, nobody likes high gas prices. I think there's a perception that the retailers make more money when the price is high and less when the price is low, and that's just not the way it works. We tend to make about the same amount of money regardless of the price, other than it's more expensive when prices are high and we pay more in credit card fees and that sort of thing. So we really don't like them either. At this point, it really hasn't impacted our business much. We're still seeing good demand. There is a point at which that will start to erode a bit. And we think that's probably a little bit closer to $5 a gallon than $4 a gallon. With respect to electric vehicles, I get asked that question a lot. And we think we're in a really good position for that. The first thing is it's going to be an evolution, not a revolution. It's going to take a long time for the entire fleet to migrate over to electric vehicles for a lot of reasons. But if you think about that experience of charging the vehicle, it takes about a half hour to charge a vehicle. And so there's a challenge with what do you do for that half an hour while your vehicle's charging versus the 5 minutes it takes you to fill up your gas tank today. And so with our prepared foods business and our digital capabilities, we think we're in a really good position because our stores are already located on commuter routes where people are already driving. And regardless of the type of fuel the vehicle takes, they'll still need to go to the same places that they did before. But you can go to a Casey's store today and you could order your food online. We'd bring it out to your car to you while you're charging your vehicle. And today we have about 25 stores that already have charging stations in them. And we're learning from that. We'll probably double that over the next year or so. And we'll continue to evolve, but it's very early days.
Right. And for the Midwest, it's probably earlier than the East Coast or West Coast, I would assume.
It is. Our geography has the lowest electric vehicle penetration in the country. So it's going to take some time.
So as the leader of Casey's and being in executive roles before and hiring people, what do you look for in hiring your team in terms of the attributes beyond the competencies for the role? What's important to you and your leaders?
Well, the way I like to lead is through teams. I'm a big believer that leading with teams and having great teamwork is critical for the success of any business. And I think that just comes from getting different points of view and leveraging the collective wisdom of the team to solve challenges. In this environment, every day is a challenge. And so I think more brains in the game is better than less. And so what I look for in people are people that can play well on teams. And so you kind of have to show up here with a team first attitude. And so that really requires authentic people and people who are really transparent and they are who they are. Not a lot of hidden agendas there. High integrity is really important to me, and low ego. That's something I don't think we have a lot of tolerance for around here. And when I find you get those authentic people with high integrity, low ego, they tend to be great team players and they're fun to be around. And so I find that not only is it effective from a business standpoint, but it's also creates a more enjoyable work environment and culture to be a part of.
You're one of the very few, less than 5% Latino CEOs. And that's inspiring for others who want to run a company. What's your advice to those in the underrepresented groups, including women who want to be in that C-suite role?
Janice, the first thing I tell people, I think it starts with ourselves, and you got to do the work. I think it's important as people are moving through their career that you have to take ownership of your own development. And that doesn't mean you can't get help along the way, but it does mean that you can't wait for somebody else to tap you on the shoulder and try to develop you. You have to take on that responsibility yourself and make that happen. I think taking on challenging assignments that stretch you and force you to grow is really important, and going to find those growth opportunities, and you got to perform. So I think that for me, that first bucket of doing the work, that's all part of that. The second thing I think is really important is building a network. And, a lot of times the best opportunities come from relationships. And I'll just give you a quick example of how I got onto the Globe Life board. I had met a person who's become a friend of mine that was involved in the National Association of Corporate Directors, and he also knew of a publisher that published a magazine that featured Latino executives, and so they included me in one of the editions of their magazine. My friend was at an NACD meeting in North Texas, ran into the chair of the audit committee for Globe Life, and they were having a conversation. The guy said they were looking for a new director, described the qualifications they were looking for. That happened to line up with my qualifications. They reached out to me, and I went through the process and was selected. But that scenario plays itself out a lot more than people realize. And so having a network, spread your story and your interests is important. I think the last thing that is really important for people to recognize is, particularly at the CEO job, is that it is very competitive to get into one of these roles. And so it's not a matter of being good enough. You have to be better than the other candidates that they're going to be out there. And I think it's important to recognize that boards tend to be risk averse. So as you're developing your skill set and developing your knowledge base and preparing for a C-suite job, the more you can demonstrate that you have the skill set and capability and you don't pose a risk for the group making the hiring decision, the more successful you're going to be. So that's the advice I give people.
Yeah, and you're right. The network, I always say to potential candidates, it's not always who you know, it's who knows you. What have you demonstrated to others where you'd be really valuable? When you and I first met in 2019 was when Casey's was honored by the Women's Forum of New York Breakfast of Corporate Champions for reaching gender parity on your board. This past year at the 2021 biennial event, you were again honored, and you said to me, Darren, and you're over 50%, right, gender parity, I don't understand why more companies haven't reached gender parity. It was music to my ears. So why is it so important to you, and what advice do you have to other companies, CEOs, in terms of achieving gender parity?
Well, first, Janice, it's just important to me because it just makes sense. And, again, if I go back to my approach with leadership and teams, I think having groups of diverse people just lead to better outcomes. And I think that's been well documented now. I think in terms of the advice you give to other CEOs or boards, I don't think it's any more complicated than knowing what it is you're looking for board candidates in particular up front before you look at candidates. I think sometimes boards tend to look at the candidate first and then try to backfit it into what they might need. But if you look at the qualifications first, that leads you to a certain slate. I think you just have to insist on having a diverse slate of candidates, and not just a slate to check a box, but a diverse slate of qualified candidates. And sometimes that's a little bit more work to do, but I have yet to find a situation where we've insisted on getting that slate that we haven't got it. And then it's the best person wins after that. And in my experience, when you truly have a diverse slate to start with, you end up with diverse people being best candidates a good portion of the time. And that's how you end up with gender parity or ethnic diversity on your board.
Yes. And, given that you're really serving those communities, and some of them very small communities with Casey's convenience stores, your employees want to reflect those customers, right? And so your board wants to reflect that. Otherwise, how do you make decisions for the customers, the employees, the investors, and the communities in which you're serving? So that's what you've done with a very diverse board in terms of understanding that customer and the employee and communities better, right?
Absolutely. Our guests come from all walks of life because everybody needs the products and services that we sell. And so it's really important for us to have those different perspectives represented. And again, the business world is so complex now, and the problems are not easy to solve. And I think just having different opinions and different points of view in the room just helps us to solve some of those challenges that all of us are facing.
So your mission at Casey's, quote, is to make life better for communities and guests every day. How do you do that with all of the employees that you have? How do you send that message down to them each and every day in terms of how their behaviors, how they deliver services?
Yeah, it really starts off with our brand positioning, and we communicate that, of course, to all of our team members that that we're here for good. And that's a little bit of a play on words, but what we mean by that is that we stand for something in our communities. We stand for good quality products and service. And so our team members in our stores, they make the products in a lot of cases with our prepared food, and they deliver that service. And so it's important that they can live up to that. We do good in the communities that we serve. And in these small towns and rural communities, the team members in our stores know the guests that come into our stores. They're part of that community. Their kids go to school with our team members' kids. They go to the same churches. They know each other. So they want to show up positively. And so our store teams do a fantastic job of really helping the communities, especially in times of need. And then the last thing is we're here for good. We're here for the long term. And as you can imagine, in a number of rural communities, people have started to migrate towards the cities, and a lot of businesses will pull up and leave. And we haven't done that. We've stayed in there, and we've stayed there to support the communities. And so it's really been important for us to play that role. And so all of that gets really embodied in that notion of that we're here for good.
Well, I'm here. I'm really glad you're here for good. I'm waiting for you to come to the East Coast. Any parting words for our audience?
Well, Janice, I'd like to just thank you for allowing me to share my story and a little bit about Casey's. And also thank you for your leadership. You've been advocating for more diversity in corporate America for a long time. And a lot of people talk about that, but you're actually being proactive about it and helping to drive the change. And so I really appreciate you and the leadership you're bringing to this conversation.
Thank you for joining us today and for your story as CEO of Casey's. And I look forward to seeing you at the next Breakfast of Corporate Champions in November 2023.
I'm looking forward to it, Janice. I'll be there.
I know you had your whole board there, so it was great to see you on stage, accepting that Parity Award. So I want to again thank you, Darren, so much for joining us. And to our audience, thank you for tuning in to another game-changing conversation on Leadership Reimagined, released on the third Thursday of every month. You can find me on Twitter, LinkedIn, or visit our website at elliggroup.com.